So before we start, there's a few things you have to pay attention. Please mute your microphones on Zoom. If you have questions during or after my presentation, please either type your name into the chat or your question directly into the chat. I will call on you or read and answer your questions when I'm done with my presentation. So my capstone project is on developing academic writers. It's a practical guide for teachers to empower students to talk about their writing in academic settings. And for this conference, I've also created a handout. And if you have another device, you can go to this link, or you can use the QR code to get access to this handout. All teachers want to provide opportunities for students to discuss their writings, but to me, it seems that students may not appreciate it. I'm also a tutor to my students, and I remember in one tutoring session, I asked my students to explain her writing intention on her writing, and she explained several sections, 3 or 4 sections, but then she stopped and said, okay, I'll just delete it if you don't like it. That surprised me. I think I had good attitude, I was friendly, and I also gave her enough time and good space for her to talk about her writing. But it seems that she didn't like it. So what's wrong with these opportunities for discussion? So the goals for my presentation and also for my guide is to raise awareness of the power struggle students face when they try to negotiate their writing. And I will also discuss factors that would affect effectiveness of negotiated interactions in the ESL academic writing classrooms. And finally, I will suggest strategies and guidelines for teachers to use to enhance students' experience in negotiation practices. And my project is largely based on literature and also my TA experience in ESL academic settings. I spent 3 semesters in first-year composition classrooms, and those are my observations and some reflections. And I also consider my own learning experience as an English learner myself. So what are opportunities for negotiating writing? The common ones are teacher-student conferencing and peer response activities. But if you provide other activities, such as game for students to talk about their writing, those also count. So we try to provide interactions for students to learn, but scholars found that there's actually a difference between active participation and negotiation. Goldstein and Conrad makes a difference between these 2 terms, and they found that actually if students actively participate without negotiation, their writing draft would not improve that much. Only if they have negotiation, their revision is more meaningful. So what's meant by active participation without negotiation? It includes students agreeing excessively and not expressing their opinions. They may just say, yeah, agreeing with the teacher or agreeing with other students all the time. So negotiation is the discussion, and people try not to agree with one person, but they try to give their opinions and they try to ask and try to reach consensus. But we're not living in vacuum, so there are always imbalanced power relations in our learning. For example, in teacher-student conferencing, even though we try to listen to our students may not feel the same as talking to their friends or their family, because teachers are also the graders. So they try to please their teachers in order to get a good grade. Or students do not feel empowered they may not feel empowered or confident to talk about their ideas. They may feel that they're too young, too naive to talk about their experience, or they are still struggling to try to get acceptance in the academic circle. And if we consider student-student interaction, students think about face a lot. They try to look competent in their classroom. They try to look also friendly. So if they care about face a lot, this will affect their interaction too. So it's hard for us to get rid of our role as evaluator, but we can empower students so that they can feel more comfortable talking about their writing. We can equip them with knowledge, strategies, and also with all the things they need to talk about their writing. So what are some factors that affect students' interaction in negotiated practices? For example, institutional factors. When we talk about academic English, it's very different from English teaching in other settings. In other settings, we might ask students to think about English as Englishes. We have different accents, and we also accept different writing styles, creativity. But when we teach academic English, we try to maintain the status quo. We try to invite the students to the inner circle of academic community, and we try to teach them conventions, usually not leaving them much space to discuss. And not all students have the same access to academic English. When they first come to university, they may not know that there's such things as academic English. In fact, some of my tutees came to the tutoring session or came to their class, they were very confident. They were impressive speakers among their friends. They were good writers in high school. But when they got back their first assignments in university, they were upset, they were frustrated. They didn't know why they got such a poor grade. Some of them would talk to their teachers, and then so they would find out reasons why their English is not good here in university. But some of them would just get upset, and they would think that, oh, maybe it's because the teacher do not like my writing. Or worse, they would think that, oh, it's because the teacher doesn't like me. And in that case, that would affect the communication. They may not want to discuss their writing or discuss anything anymore. Another one is about discussion. Not all students understand the value or the nature of discussion. Some students may treat discussion as an assessment. They may thought that teachers try to ask them to get the correct answers by talking together. Even when I was an undergraduate student, when I was back in Hong Kong, I was an English major. So I was very lucky to have a teacher who told us that we should feel free to write about our opinions, because everyone can have their own perspective on different issues. But then when I started writing an essay, I couldn't start because I thought, so if we can be free to write about our own perspectives, why do we have to discuss at all? Because we can just have our own answers. So I didn't really understand that by discussing, we would get a better understanding, or it will help us understand things in different perspectives. It will help us even learn better. So only after talking to my teacher about discussion, or so it's discussion face-to-face or discussion on paper, then I realized the importance of writing. And finally, I could discuss my writing and do my writing. Interpersonal factors. So we talked about face. Students don't want to lose face. And sometimes they might want to try to preserve others' face. If they do not understand another student's accent or ideas, they might feel not polite to ask for clarification. So in that case, they do not have a real interaction. And another problem is positioning. Positioning is how a student views themselves, and also how other people view these students. So it's not about a personality. If two students are equally talkative, they can be positioned in different ways and then have different interactions. According to Kaya, others study two talkative students are positioned in different ways. One as a funny student and another one as an arrogant student. When the teacher interacted with the funny student, she thanked the students for contribution. She also answered irrelevant answer. But then to the arrogant student, she stopped him. So at the beginning, the interaction or what the two students did was actually very similar. But because of the way the teacher interacted with the students, the teacher positioned the students in different ways, and that made the other students also position these students in 2 different ways. And finally, the one who was considered arrogant was not given the chance to speak. When in their discussion, when he talked, other students would just say, and didn't respond too much. So his right to speak was denied, and his learning opportunities were affected. Then linguistic factors. Students may not be aware that there are different conventions across disciplines or in different genres. For example, when I was in one class, the first assignment for the students was to write about their personal experience. And in the second assignment, it was more about studies, facts, but then my students came to my tutoring session, bringing in their personal experiences. And in other class, something happened similarly. Their first assignment was on reading response. So they talked about their feelings or any thoughts they had after reading. But then in the second assignment, they were asked to write summary. But then my tutee came to the tutoring session, putting in all her thoughts, and then we tried to discuss, even though the teacher talked about what summary is in class, the student didn't understand. And only after half an hour of discussion, my tutee finally told me, oh, so for writing summary, we don't have to put personal comments because it's different from writing an essay. And at that time, only at that time, I discovered that students do not know differences in writing different genres, and they just try to put in whatever they know, whatever they learn from their class. Next, linguistic preferences across cultures. In academic English classroom, we try to teach students to write topic sentences, and we ask them to support the details after the topic sentences. But in other cultures, such as the Vietnamese writing or Chinese writing, actually students do not have this understanding. When they write a paragraph, usually they try to give some background, like reasons why they came up with that idea, and they try to make it like a riddle, make it more mysterious because they care about the beauty of language. And then finally, at the end of the paragraph, they talk about their main idea. So if students in writing conferences or in class discussions, if they feel that what they want to do in their writing cannot be heard, maybe they will feel they don't have much sense of ownership. They don't really have control over their writing, and they do not have much satisfaction after talking with teacher, and it will affect their motivation. And finally, individual factors. We may think that speaking or listening abilities affect a student's performance in interactions, but actually it's their efficacy, self-efficacy, how they view their abilities. If students view themselves as not competent, they will be more passive. And not all students are trained to think metacognitively. When I ask students to talk about their writing, many of them tell me, oh, so I just think and I write. Many of them would just say, I just write. They are not aware of their logic or their flow of ideas. If they are not aware of it, it's hard for them to describe it or even discuss it. So what are some ways we can do to help them? I consider these negotiated practices in 4 aspects: sociocultural contexts, modes of negotiation, types of negotiation, support and resources for learners, the language we give them and strategies we give them. And also we have to manage the talk, like how we talk with the students, and we have to manage how they talk with each other. But I have 14 pedagogical considerations in my guide, but time is limited and I'm going to focus on 4. So the first one is understanding writing prompts. So because I have tutoring sessions with my students, so we always have the opportunity to discuss writing. But usually when we start our writing sessions, they always come with questions like, what am I supposed to write for this assignment? Oh, can you help me with it? I'm not sure if the answers are correct. I'm not sure if I'm answering the questions, even though they have their writing in hand. And even if they have a clear prompt in their hand, and even teachers give guidelines, they aren't usually sure about what to write. They, in other words, they only have little control or little independence over their writing. So I've devised a handout, and I include instructional verbs. Those are also called rhetorical cues. We try to help students find out words that will help them understand the nature of the assignment. For example, analyze, reflect, these kind of words, give them the meanings. And then I will also give them the mental processes and writing procedures, such as this. So when they analyze, they really think about it in detail, but they don't know that they have to explain it a lot. So we have to tell them explicitly that they have to explain in detail and in a logical manner. And in another case, in one scenario, one of my tutees knew that she had to write about a reflective essay on her learning style. And she thought about one class she had, and the only argument she had was it was boring. So I helped her to find out the word reflect. That was a key word, but still she talked about how bored she felt and repeating it over and over again. And finally, I had to let her know what a reflective essay is. She had to link her personal experience to the reading materials, and that makes it a reflective essay. And I, for example, respond, I also give them some prompts to help them start thinking about it. Another type of negotiation is writer's journal. We talked about metacognitive skills before, and a writer's journal would allow students to think about their writing intentions, struggles, and rationales. We can ask students to put it in a journal, or we can ask them to write about their questions or these inner thoughts in the margin of their paper. When they are more aware of it, they can describe it. So many of my students, many of my tutees started writing about these inner thoughts with questions about grammar. But later on, after we interact more by me writing back to their response, by me responding to their inner thoughts, they learn to talk about their writing, think about organization, think about content more, and think about writing strategies. And apart from in-class peer review session, we can also provide outside class writers group. It's a group for students to practice and discuss writing together. So students would write about their essay and then ask questions. So this is like something what they do in the writer's journal, but then each other will exchange, and then they will read the paper, and then they will also respond to the writer's questions. And finally, they will think about the feedback they have and then ask more questions, and hopefully they will discuss more. So for this outside class writers group, it is hoped that students have more equal participation because they don't have to fear the social barriers they have, like gender or race, or sometimes when a student do not understand a part, they may frown a little bit, and then that could be scary as well. I don't have any literature about writers group, exactly the same as writers group, but I have something similar. Lee and Liu talked about responding to forum, and it found that students really benefit from it. They became more careful reader and writer, and it reduces their writer anxiety because they know that, oh, everyone has the same problem, and they're more interested and motivated, and it also built a learning community. And finally, language support. We can teach students how to discuss in classroom, not only about writing, but we can teach them how to give opinions, ask for clarification, ask for help. But for writing specific questions, we can provide them with questions like this. I divide the questions into several sections like ideas, organization, language, and feedback. So they can even use these sentences as help. For example, my classmate suggested this, but I'm trying to do this. Should I? And then talked about the revision. It's hoped that in this way they can think about their writing more carefully or the feedback more carefully. And I don't really try to overwhelm you with a long list of pedagogical guidelines, but when I wrote this paper, I struggled a little bit. I thought maybe I could just focus on 1 or 2 points, but then what I discovered was I try to focus on what happened in the negotiation practice, but then what surprised me was that what actually teachers do outside the negotiation practice affects the interaction a lot. And I really applaud writing teachers for managing the interaction so well, for writing teachers to pay attention to speaking. And I'm really thankful for being able to think about it and being able to observe in my mentor teachers class. And I know time is running out, but I really want to thank the professors I meet in this MA TESOL program. I've never felt so powerless in academic settings before, but as a mother and without any support from my family, and I feel really powerless, but my teachers, not only are they professional, they provide care, encouragement, and they help me understand that what teachers do are not just to teach, but to support students and empower them. And I would like to thank Dr. Robert Coles for reading my paper. I know the thoughts are really messy because of this hard time. And I really thank Professor Esther Chan for mentoring me, for sharing her expertise generously, and for caring for me and care for me. And when I finish my guide, I will upload it to my portfolio link, the same link I gave you, so you may use this QR code too. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And now I have to go through the chat to see what are the questions. Oh, so now I see Dr. Cole's question about developing writing prompts. Yeah, it's hard for me to control other professors. I know that there are scholars who wrote about how to devise writing prompts, but from my perspective, it's hard to give all professors the same guidelines. So I'm thinking of how to support students even they don't have good guidelines. I don't think all writing prompts are always so bad. At least they will find the instructional verbs. So these are tiny tips, they can look at it. But I know it's also overwhelming because the list is long and the mental process or the writing process are abstract to students. But if I were to teach, I would maybe I would give them the handout at the beginning of the semester, and then I will ask them to look at it when we get a new assignment. And students can feel free to talk about their assignments in other classes, and we can also discuss the instructional verbs together and talk about the process.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Cindy, this is Marisol. I prefer to ask the question live. I'm having a hard time with the texting. I'm sort of fascinated by this idea of the learners perceiving there's a likeness, like you're like me, I'm like you, and therefore we can give each other better feedback. And I'm also trying to juxtapose that with, at least in language acquisition, we think pushed output is a real driver of acquisition, that you have to fail in your comprehension to actually pay attention to new things. So my question is about, when is the best time to introduce discomfort into the writing negotiation process? I mean, just even thinking about your own writing experience, what you've seen among students, I think discomfort is part of the pedagogical reality, and what advice you might have for how do you, I mean, obviously there's no rule here, but I do think that's an underlying emotion that drives pushed output. When you know that someone doesn't understand you, but you don't feel overwhelmingly threatened, you try to make sense, and it helps your acquisition. You have to feel a little bit of that discomfort. So I just, what kind of insights, even personal ones, you have about your own writing that might you might offer here? And congratulations.
Thank you. I don't know if I fully understand your question, but I think that students face difficulties all the time. And as teachers, we can only be flexible and observant. For example, if something came up, for example, I talked about how students want to preserve other students' space by not asking questions, or they're too afraid to embarrass another students. We can maybe, during discussion, we can raise the question of, it's important to ask for clarification, especially in academic setting. We don't have to make it like intimidating or overwhelming by saying, oh, so you have to ask this to make it clear, or we can normalize it by saying it's natural to ask for clarification, because in academic setting, everything is so concise. So maybe after you catch a few keywords, and if you don't understand, it's completely normal to ask it. And actually scholars do the same, or teachers do the same. Yeah, try to respond it bit by bit. And because I also noticed it's a writing class, so talking about too much of speaking, students might not feel comfortable as well. But it's how teachers respond to student bit by bit in the experience.
No, that's a great answer. It makes me feel like I wish I were better at reading the emotions behind the fear of rejection. I've been reading some literature lately that says that you can handle rejection in your personal life and your work life if you practice rejection in other areas of life which are less threatening. So like taking a cold shower for 10 seconds every day, leaving your phone outside your bedroom to charge instead of at your bedside. Those are ways that you feel uncomfortable, don't threaten you. And there's some really interesting things that if you do little things like that, you can affect changes that might be able to help you as a writer, where it's merciless sometimes if you. So thank you for helping me think through that at a what it must be like for students too.
Thank you, Dr. Santos. I noticed it's 12:58, and I know Wendy is going to have her presentation. Thank you for coming. And if you, to join her presentation, please leave my meeting and go to the conference website. You can see her link there. Thank you for coming, everyone.